This story begins in the middle of a terrible battle. Warrior named Aaron tells us that everything started when one day he opened his eyes and found himself in a medieval fantasy world. And without understanding how he got there, he had to adapt and become a mercenary to survive. And in that way, he faced enemies countless times. And so we see him use his sword to stab a barbarian in the chest, with the surprise that the barbarian uses what little strength he has left to hold him, allowing a comrade to almost kill him from behind. Fortunately, Aaron is rescued by an agile red-haired woman who warns him not to lower his guard, and who apparently is the commander, since she orders the trumpets to sound while they begin to advance forward. And by the time the battle ends with their side as the winner, Aaron thinks that the only thing that matters to him is to live. And the commander congratulates him for ignoring everything else, as she approaches him tenderly, affirming that she only wants to make sure that his handsome face has not received any scratch. And then it begins to rain, but for her that is no problem, because she insists that she likes that kind of weather, and she proposes that they go east once the war is over, because it often rains a lot there. The problem is that apparently quite some time has passed since then, and now Aaron has a gigantic scar on his face, watching the rain as he remembers the words of the redhead, who asked him not to forget her. Suddenly, a loud whistle is blown, and several swordsmen begin to arrive, including two who refer to him as Captain, assuring him that the others will arrive soon, while complaining that someone named Hans has caused such a big accident. The bearded one insists they already expected it, because Hans is a mage, and they are not trustworthy people, to the point that they could even have made a pact with a demon. Aaron feels curious, but the other man, the one with long hair, mocks such an idea, claiming that it is pure nonsense and that he has always been jealous of Hans because of his looks, though he jokes that before long, Hans's nickname will change to Handsome, even if only his head remains, hinting that he will probably end up hanged if they manage to catch him. In this way, they arrive at the headquarters of the outer fortress guard of Kasardik, where Aaron is received by Manhwa, the commander, who scolds him for arriving late and asks him if it is true that he used to be very close with the famous criminal Hans. At first, the protagonist remembers that Hans used to treat him like an older brother, so it could be said they were close, but he knows that would complicate things, so he insists that they only greeted each other when they met. Curiously, the commander states that this makes everything simpler, since the crime committed by Hans is not simple, but involves the Lord's daughter, from whom he stole something that should not be stolen. And as Cedric's guards, they have the duty to catch him, so he insists that they bring him back alive or dead, with no other option. Aaron accepts, but thinks it is a very troublesome situation, and right then he notices that his team, the 4th unit, is already ready to depart. On the way, they wonder if Hans could be hiding in the horrible District 7, and complain about having to go there to look for him while thinking about drinking, which makes the protagonist shut them up once and for all, since they do not understand that their heads are also on the line. And then he notices a hooded figure, somewhat suspicious, and orders him to reveal himself, provoking the man to laugh with a villainous tone, making it clear that it has been a long time since they last saw each other. By the time he reveals his face, Aaron punches him immediately, assuming he is a criminal, when in reality he is just the local herbalist, and without a hint of shame, the protagonist tells him he confused him with someone else. But things get interesting when the man explains that he only wanted to tell him that someone stole all his herbs, including a root called Grim Rot. That catches Aaron's attention, since it is usually used to stop hemorrhages, so he begins to follow the tracks of the famous thief, who turns out to be none other than Hans himself, who is clearly badly wounded. The good thing is that Aaron finds him alone in an alley, so he insists that he come peacefully, only to be surprised when Hans begins to pronounce indecipherable words, and in an instant takes full control of the rainwater, with which he attacks while claiming he is sorry, but he does not plan to be caught yet. Of course, Aaron knows there is no way to escape water on a rainy day, so he charges at him at full speed, dodging his attacks, until with a single swing of his sword, he demonstrates such power that Hans falls, unable to continue fighting. Not only that, but Aaron's attack leaves a gigantic cut on Hans's neck, making it clear that he could kill him if he wanted to. So through tears, Hans can only ask for forgiveness, but the protagonist ignores him, insisting that if he really made a pact with the demon, there should be a scar near his heart. So he lifts his shirt, confirming that it is clean, while asking why the hell he did what he did. Hines only tells him that one day he will understand, and Aaron thinks he is going to lose his mind with this whole situation, so he throws him a healing potion, telling him to shut up and follow him. The protagonist knows that for stealing, they could easily cut off his arm, not to mention his other crimes, since in that medieval world, either you are innocent or you end up hanging. In his mind, he leads Hans to a small secret passage and tells him to get lost. Hans tries to thank him, but Aaron punches him and demands that he stop calling him brother. He just has to leave. While the others search the area, Aaron takes care of erasing all traces, allowing Hans, the once kind man, to disappear from that small fortress without leaving a single clue. Unfortunately, it is then revealed that his crime was none other than stealing the underwear of Lady Cedric, and the protagonist thinks that in that medieval world, where cleanliness, law, and aesthetics are completely primitive, he has no choice but to continue being nothing more than an overworked captain of the guard. Several days later, after searching every corner of the fortress, the members of the 4th unit complain about not having completed the mission, and that includes Kale, the bearded one, Bring, the youngest, Paul, the serious one, Carter, who is just 1 second away from dying from lack of sleep, and Burnham, the second in command, who insists that they should go and rest for the moment. Meanwhile, Aaron is summoned to a meeting by William, the sheriff of Cedric's guard, who could condemn him to death or lock him in prison for life with a single word. The problems begin when William tells him that he already knows Aaron was close to Hans and that he was patrolling District 7 completely alone. So without mincing words, he asks if he seriously didn't find anything or if perhaps he let him escape. Fortunately, Aaron keeps calm, asking between the lines if he has any proof of what he says. After thinking for a while, the sheriff simply turns toward the commander, thanking him for the cigarettes he gave him, though it is obvious they are more expensive than what his salary could afford, almost accusing him of having stolen them. All of that is part of a demonstration of power he uses before turning back to the protagonist, reminding him that anyone who commits or helps to commit a crime in this castle will die at his hands. So, being guilty of that last part, but unwilling to admit it, Aaron smiles falsely, saying he will keep it in mind. By sunset, after several days of nonstop work, he can finally go home, while thinking that in that world there are no human rights, but that he was lucky they decided to close the case, as if Hans had managed to escape. At that moment, he hears a scream inside the tavern, where we see Hen, the owner of the place, still being harassed by one of the clients, while the others ignore the situation out of fear. The friends of the man insist they just want to meet new people with whom they can share the bed. Of course, she understands they are mercenaries from another country, but she warns them that things don't work like that here, and that they should stop before regretting it. That is enough for the harasser's friend to start threatening her, sliding his hand into the woman's cleavage and claiming that no one will come to help her. The good thing is that at that very moment Aaron appears, whom the woman and all the locals recognize, so she takes the opportunity to stand behind him, while all the mercenaries prepare for a fight. The protagonist begins joking with the woman, saying 10 days, and she says 5, starting a strange negotiation that no one understands. But since they are ignored, the mercenaries get angry and charge at him immediately. However, the difference in level is so abysmal that Aaron stops one of them by grabbing his head with a single hand, while promising the woman to protect her in exchange for 6 days of free lodging and tonight's dinner. Everyone knows it is technically his duty, but the woman accepts anyway, while Aaron throws the harasser against his colleagues, stating that it is time to educate these damned medievals. Of course, the harasser's friend is surprised, and the locals burst out laughing, because the show has begun, which includes watching Aaron give them the beating of their lives, with the goal of educating them and making them a little more polite by force. Curiously, they admit that they only come to that end because they know Aaron usually goes there, which implies watching firsthand how he fulfills his role as the best human cleaner of Cedric. So they don't hesitate to cheer him on, while he only thinks that maybe he should also teach them a lesson. Then, one of the mercenaries tries to pull out a knife, but Aaron stops him on the spot, asking if he is really sure he wants to take things to that level, so the man backs off. And with that, Aaron's shift for the day ends. But the problem begins at night, when lying on his sword, Aaron remembers that they gave him that name right after he arrived in that world, and his thoughts drift to the last time he saw the red-haired woman, who, in the middle of destruction, asked him to flee without looking back, because he had to keep on living. However, the images are so heartbreaking that he gets up at once, with tears in his eyes, unsheathing his sword, ready for battle. So he goes to train to deal with his emotions, and he thinks that 6 years have passed since he arrived in that world, and he doesn't know how much longer he will have to endure it. But then a man approaches silently, surprised to see someone so skilled within the borders of Cedric. The stranger even begins to applaud, but Aaron only notices his armor, which bears the symbol of the Fenner family along with an impressive spiral, making it clear that he is not a common man, but rather a knight. Of course, in this medieval world, knights are the most important people of all, since they can wield aura and fight demons, surpassing human limits. And not only that, but since he belongs to that family, the man must be a knight of the Bolt Fortress, which makes Aaron wonder, what kind of business could he have in that place? Aaron wonders, and immediately the man notices his discomfort, insisting that he was impressed with his swordsmanship, to the point of asking if Aaron is also a knight. But they are interrupted by Vivian, the only daughter of Lord Cedric, and the same one involved in the whole drama of the underwear stolen by Hans. Clearly, Aaron shows his respects, introducing himself as a member of the guard, and she recognizes him, thanking him for his work, but also apologizing that her father made such a fuss over something so silly. Interestingly, this knight, whose name is Ben, is working as the young lady's escort. However, the protagonist doesn't have the chance to find out why, since she insists on leaving so that he can continue training. Still, he is not the only one with curiosity, as Ben too is sure that Aaron cannot be just an ordinary guard. He must definitely be a knight, even with all those mysteries. Then the protagonist decides that it's not his business and heads to work, where the commander greets him directly with a barrage of shouting, sending him to handle a very important matter. It turns out that the harassers he beat up were not just random mercenaries, but were actually hired by the team from the inner fortress. So Aaron has to go resolve the misunderstanding at the office of the officer in charge, the one who hates him the most. When he knocks on the door, he is once again greeted by another storm of shouting, this time from a blonde woman who cannot believe that a captain of the guard is capable of causing so many problems all the time. Emitting a poisonous aura, she tells him that if he cannot do his job properly, he should just resign. With a smile, Aaron thinks he expected nothing less from her, but this time he has a plan to deal with her foul mood, and following Kale's advice, he tries to give her a sincere compliment, which ends up sounding more like a threat. The good thing is that Nova is so taken aback that she decides to go straight to the point, explaining that the mercenaries he knocked out yesterday were destined for the Bolt Fortress. And although he tries to explain that they were trash, she orders him to shut up, clarifying that now he will have to join them and accompany them on their next mission. Aaron thinks that sounds really bad, so he asks what the mission is about. It turns out to be an escort mission for a carriage, with the peculiarity that there seem to be far too many people for something like that, almost as if they were preparing for a much bigger battle. In short, he has a very bad feeling about all of it, so he asks the person beside him who is inside the carriage, only to be surprised that it is one of the harassers, specifically the only one still able to stand after what Aaron did to them, to whom he gives the nickname Weasel. The interesting thing is that at that moment, other mercenaries mention that they will camp at night in Knoxville, a small town just outside of Cassidrick. But to their surprise, when they arrive at the place, it is completely empty. Some assume it was because of the bad harvest, while others wonder if it could have been the work of demons. Alokiar decides to investigate, followed by the Weasel and closely observed by Vivian, who happens to be one of those traveling in the carriage. As they move forward, the Weasel asks him if he has any idea what is happening, but the protagonist is completely lost in his thoughts, remembering a time when he gave a book to a freckled boy, who insisted that he could visit him in a village whenever he wanted. With that in mind, they continue exploring until they step into a gigantic pool of blood, and when they raise their gaze, they find themselves in a street full of lifeless bodies of those who were once its inhabitants. Both are truly left speechless. But the situation becomes even worse when a dark voice calls the protagonist from behind. As he turns around, he sees that it is Vivian, staring at him with sinister eyes, while asking, "What are you doing here?" However, we are left in doubt about how the situation ended, since the story skips forward a few hours, by which time the camp has already been set up. The Weasel complains that everyone is eating so calmly after seeing those corpses, and the boy even wonders if it was the work of some lunatic. But then an older man approaches, assuring them that the victims were surely sacrificed to the demons, and he offers them some alcohol. The protagonist refuses, since he needs to stay as alert as possible. The man then introduces himself as John, commander of the convoy, and Arun clarifies that he is not a mercenary, but only doing this as a part-time job. The conversation continues until everyone becomes excited at the sight of Vivian's perfect figure, whom they call the Flower of the East. She walks toward a small house, where she will be staying with the others. John himself did not expect they would be escorting such an important person. This takes us back to the previous conversation the protagonist had with her, where despite having behaved so suspiciously, she suddenly switched to her usual gentle attitude, insisting that this trip would just be a simple journey to the Bolt Fortress to get a change of scenery at her father's suggestion. The protagonist tries to ask more questions, but Venda makes it clear that they should not reveal too much, and that Aaron only deserves to know what is appropriate for his position. Back in the present, he wonders why Lord Cedric would send his daughter to another fortress, until John comments that everything feels unusually calm, as if a demon might appear at any moment. The fugitive only responds that they are lucky to have knights on their side, who have been specifically trained for such things. Moreover, he admits that as long as he has his sword with him, he will always find a way to survive, no matter how slim the chance, though he says this as if it were something bad. John simply wishes him luck. Hours later, in the middle of the night, Aaron enters a house and finds the book from before, making him think that the little boy from his memories must have grown quite a lot by now. The problem is that out of nowhere, someone approaches from behind, and he does not hesitate to attack with all his strength, only to notice that it is a kind of zombie, which keeps attacking until he eliminates it once and for all. As he wonders what the hell is happening, he starts to hear screams all over the camp, realizing that the weasel is also being attacked, so he saves his life. The strange thing is that despite all the noise, there seems to be no sign of anyone else. With tears in his eyes, the weasel explains that everyone is deeply asleep and won't wake up. They assume that they have fallen under a sleep spell, but that still doesn't explain why they are unaffected, until they remember that they were the only ones who did not eat dinner. Little by little, Aaron pieces everything together, assuming that whoever is behind this must have put sleeping drugs into the food, because their goal is to capture none other than Vivian alive. But before they can do anything, both of them are completely surrounded by zombies. John tells the boy to cover himself, since he plans to use them as warm-up, and in this way, he begins to annihilate them one by one, assuming that the army's wake-up call will not be long in coming. He keeps fighting until all the enemies have fallen, well, all except one, because at that moment, he turns and comes face to face with the boy from his memories, slowly walking toward him. Alok Aaron only tells him, "You've grown, Horn," before raising his sword with the intention of cutting him in half. However, to understand why this boy is so important, we must go back 2 years into the past. When escaping from his pursuers, Aaron arrived at that same village and met Horn, the son of a simple farmer and a great fan of books. Back then, the boy always insisted on calling him a knight because he was the strongest person he had ever seen in his life. Aaron could not help but treat him like a younger brother, teasing him about all his quirks. That same smile is now gone in the present, as the protagonist looks into his blood-red eyes while thinking that even after settling in Castrix, he used to visit Horn often. The boy was always fascinated by all the stories he had to tell about the city. In one of those visits, Aaron told him about the libraries, and Horn back then promised that he would become a librarian so that he could spend the entire day surrounded by books. The protagonist could not have agreed more, but any possibility of that future disappeared when, with no other option, Aaron realized he would have to eliminate him. The problem is that he cannot do it, and the memories keep flooding his mind, like the day he saw Horn with a black eye, when the boy confessed that his father had beaten him for saying he wanted to become a librarian, since his destiny was to work on the farm. Yet, the boy's tears now remind him that demons feed on human despair, and so, unable to kill him, he drops his sword and gives Horn a strong hug, insisting that he is not a knight, just a guard, trying to do the best he can. As the minutes pass, the rain intensifies, and the weasel returns after finally waking everyone who had fallen under the sleeping drug, arriving just in time as more and more zombies close in on the place. Amid all the chaos, Aaron neutralizes Horn, asking him to rest in peace. But things spiral out of control when a huge explosion shakes the entire village, and they realize that at the very center of it all is the place where Vivian is. Of course, Aaron picks up his sword once more, not to save the young lady, but to avenge his friend. On Vivian's side, her maids have already fallen while trying to protect her, and the only one still standing is none other than Ben. She admits that they had decided to bring her to the fortress of Bolt because of certain strange rumors that she had become the target of a very important and very evil person. What they did not expect, however, was such a brazen attack like this one. Even so, she points out that protecting a lady is the joy of any knight, and Ben prepares to fight, willing to give everything he has, even when his opponent is a wicked demon. With courage, Ben demands that the demon step back, but the creature only mocks him, revealing that his wounds were inflicted by a dagger coated with deadly poison, and that even though he is still conscious, the sedative from dinner will keep his mind completely clouded. In other words, he has no chance. Ben knows this, yet he still tries to remain calm, mocking the demon's appearance to the point where the creature becomes irritated and launches at him with brutal force, barely allowing him to counter. Desperate, Ben realizes that his aura is not even at half of its normal level. But considering that his opponent only has demonic enchantment in one of his arms, his plan is to keep provoking him, close the distance, and strike at his weak points. With this in mind, he tells himself there is still a chance to win. When the demon makes his next move, Ben slashes his sword across his shoulder. The problem is that it has no effect at all. The demon grabs him by the neck, mocking him for being so naive as to think such a thing could work, declaring that he would never fall at the hands of such an insignificant knight. Without hesitation, the demon decides to kill him for believing he even had a chance. But then Ben notices something behind him. It's Aaron, who arrives just in time, ready to avenge Horn. In the blink of an eye, the protagonist strikes and slashes the demon's face in half, demanding that he accept his fate. Unfortunately, it will not be that easy, as the demon regenerates almost instantly, asking who the hell Aaron is before attacking him with all his might. The blow sends Aaron crashing across the room. What is surprising, however, is that his strike was no ordinary one, because the demon's regenerated skin starts to spiral out of control. He admits that because of someone who isn't even a knight, he ended up wasting a large amount of blood. This was a problem for him, since his powers are directly tied to the blood of the townsfolk that had been offered as sacrifice. That means he must take Vivian before it's too late. Meanwhile, Aaron insists that this is his revenge for one of the innocents who had been turned into a zombie. He keeps striking with everything he has, landing more and more nearly fatal blows that the demon continues to recover from. But the protagonist insists he doesn't care, that every time the demon regenerates, he will attack again. It seems like a simple pattern, one the demon continues to brush off with confidence, though in his mind he realizes this is not good. The demonic core in his arm has already begun to drain his own blood, and at this rate he will be completely consumed. Curiously, the protagonist notices his concern and mocks him, saying he thought the demon could withstand a few blows, but it turns out he's nothing more than a weakling. The exchange of blows continues, and amid the demon's confusion over who this mysterious Aaron really is, he cannot believe someone without a knight's title could have such strength. It even looks as though Aaron is about to win, when another person suddenly enters the battle. It is John, the supposed commander of the convoy, who is actually nothing more than an accomplice in everything that has happened. Without showing much surprise, Aaron admits that he had been waiting for the moment John would crawl out from wherever he was hiding. The man responds that while he may look like a foolish bear on the outside, inside he is cunning like a fox, since clearly the protagonist had suspected him from the very beginning. As the two exchange blows, the old man complains that if it weren't for him, everything would have already been over. While the demon watches the scene, he tries to calm himself down. However, he doesn't succeed, because a voice coming from the demonic core in his arm whispers to him that it is already too late and that it no longer needs him as a vessel. In an instant, the demonic erosion begins to spread throughout the rest of his body. Although the man desperately tries to convince it to give him another chance, the demonic core insists that it has already found another body that looks far more appetizing. Unfortunately for Aaron, his sword is not strong enough to withstand such a battle. When it shatters, the old man assumes victory is his and immediately attacks, telling Aaron to just die. But the protagonist strikes him directly in the face with the hilt of his broken sword. The blow is so strong that it breaks several of the man's bones, and he collapses to the ground unconscious, bleeding out. Yet the battle has only just begun, because Aaron realizes that his opponent has been completely consumed by the demon, adopting an even more monstrous appearance than before. Excited by his newfound power, the demon asks Aaron a question. What does he plan to do now? Because the creature fully intends to take control of him, insisting that since Aaron isn't even a knight, he doesn't stand the slightest chance of winning. But in the middle of that arrogance, the protagonist throws away his broken blade and charges at him like a beast, tearing out one of the demon's grotesque eyes with his teeth like a wild animal. The demon thinks it reckless, but Aaron's mind begins to drift back to his past, back to the companions he once had in his mercenary days. The towering Galgai, the shepherd Gwei, the mage Avery, and the leader, that red-haired woman with the radiant smile who had become so important to him. The problem is that the warm memory suddenly twists into a nightmare when a blond man with a blurred-out face touches his shoulder. With arrows and swords sticking out of his back, he tells Aaron not to forget, that he must survive no matter the cost. At that moment, the image changes, and all that remains are the corpses of his companions lying lifeless on the ground. Back in the present, the demon unleashes his full power, declaring that Aaron will make a truly delicious prey. The real problem begins, however, when after all of that, Aaron suddenly opens his eyes without remembering a single thing and finds himself face to face with Ben. He tells him he thought he had died, only for the knight to reply the same, because when he woke up, he found Aaron completely unconscious and felt his presence growing weaker and weaker. What surprises Aaron is that his body feels perfectly fine, yet he cannot remember anything from the rest of the fight. He assumes everything went well, since Ben also tells him he found the demon dead next to him. With that in mind, Ben asks if Aaron was the one who defeated it, but Aaron admits he has no idea. Still, as long as the demon is dead, the method doesn't matter. What truly interests him is knowing what Vivian has to do with the demons. However, Ben reminds him that it isn't his business, and the only thing he needs to know is that he owes him his life. The knight then decides to formally introduce himself and thank Aaron. The protagonist only replies, "You're welcome." After that, the bodies of the victims are burned. Aaron concludes that whoever was behind all this sacrificed an entire village just to summon a demon capable of taking the life of Lady Cedric. He thinks about the foul stench rising from the corpses, but once everything is finished, they decide to return to Cedric. Interestingly, between Aaron and Ben, they agree to tell everyone that it was the knight who defeated the enemy. Not only so Aaron can continue working peacefully, but also because if people learned he fought a demon without being a knight, there's a strong chance the church would start an investigation. Naturally, Aaron wants nothing to do with that. The only thing he cares about is that he survived, and that he will receive a very good payment for his work. He also discovers that the weasel is still alive, having managed to endure by hiding under a pile of corpses, proving he is tougher than he looks. In any case, the protagonist assumes everything is over until the next morning, when he looks at himself in the mirror and notices a demonic eye appearing on his chest. The worst part is that at that very instant, the eye opens and greets him with complete confidence, causing Aaron to scream in terror and grab a dagger, ready to stab himself. Of course, the demon is sure he doesn't have the guts to do it, and it's right, because that would mean taking his own life, going against his one and only goal. With nothing else to do, the protagonist asks if it is the same demon from before, thinking that perhaps it attached itself to him at the moment he bit it. But the demon makes it clear that it isn't that simple, since it has taken his body of its own free will. Of course, the protagonist demands that it choose someone else, but the demon explains that changing hosts involves a process that could take up to 100 years. In response, Aaron stabs the eye with his dagger. The demon insists that having it around won't be as bad as it seems, and to prove it, it decides to give him a preview of one of the many benefits. In an instant, it releases a brutal amount of energy, an aura, a power that only knights should be capable of possessing. It doesn't last long, but the demon insists that it can offer him the potential to achieve great things. However, at that very moment, Aaron collapses and falls asleep, proving that he is not as strong as he appears. The problem is that right after this, Henna begins calling out to him desperately, because a representative of the Church of Cedric has come looking for him. In fact, the man is in such a rush that he doesn't even bother asking permission. He marches straight up to the second floor, declaring that a commoner like Aaron has no right to question the summons of the nobles. Fortunately, it's implied that the one who sent him is Ben. But that doesn't change the fact that Aaron receives a punch in the face with the order to wait a little longer because he will be ready soon. As Aaron starts heading downstairs, Henna asks him to come back early since she's learned a massage technique that will make him feel really good. Though it sounds like a provocation, she quickly adds that it'll only cost him 50 copper coins. Naturally, Aaron refuses and walks off relieved, knowing it's Ben who sent for him. He even imagines that the knight might give him an extra reward for eliminating the demon. That night, however, we see that Ben himself wasn't sure about taking the credit. Defeating the demon meant receiving a glorious title that would change his life, but Aaron insisted it would only be a hassle, making him promise instead to share part of the money. In other words, he has nothing to worry about. What truly catches Aaron's attention, though, is the matter of the aura, a skill similar to a miracle, supposedly granted only to knights, chosen by God and trained by the Empire. The training method is said to be top secret, so he doesn't understand why the demon inside him would be capable of using a power so similar. In any case, Aaron asks the church representative how much longer it will take to arrive, using the opportunity to mock him. But all of that is pushed aside when they finally arrive at the imposing solar church. Aaron suddenly remembers that he has a demon inside him, which probably means he shouldn't be able to enter. Yet to his surprise, he doesn't burst into flames when he steps through the door. Instead, he is welcomed by the kind Ben, who greets him with a smile, while Aaron can only think that he might be exorcised at any moment. At that point, the knight introduces him to the priest, Emilian, and the inquisitor Johanna begins staring at him intently, and in an instant she prepares to strike. Sensing that she may have detected the demon inside him, Aaron grips his sword, ready for battle. The surprise is that instead of attacking him, she simply places her fist gently on his forehead, which means she is granting him her blessing. That action, however, has a huge effect on the demon. Its presence grows stronger, and it becomes offended that a dog of God dared to touch it. But the priest explains that Ben told them the whole truth, and they have decided to honor Aaron with a small extra reward, the golden brooch of the church, along with a pile of gold coins. Since this is such an important object, Aaron pledges to lend all his strength if the church ever finds itself in trouble. Still, since that is something that will probably never happen, he figures he has nothing to worry about. Instantly, he remembers the rumors that the priest is one of the most powerful and corrupt in Kassadrik, but honestly, he couldn't care less. And so, amid the chants of "Long live the Solar Church," Aaron swears loyalty for the rest of his life. The funny part is that for someone who supposedly didn't want to draw attention, that very same afternoon he shows up before Kale wearing an ostentatious suit of armor, proudly claiming that it was all a gift from the god of the sun. There, they are served by a charismatic waitress named Charlotte, who asks about Bring, his favorite of the group, since she was thinking of offering him a massage. Aaron can only think that this must be where Henna got her strange ideas to attract customers. Charlotte also shares the latest rumors, the arrival of a group of swindlers in the city, who have apparently settled in the Sick Mermaid, a tavern in the 5th District. There, they began gambling and winning in absurd ways. In fact, one of their supposed victims was the Weasel, who didn't hesitate to accuse them of fraud, insisting that it was all the work of a mysterious hooded girl with dice. For someone who hates working, Aaron becomes surprisingly excited, claiming he cannot allow them to use a minor in such criminal acts, and that it's time to teach those filthy gamblers a lesson. The problem is that when he arrives at the tavern, it's obvious that his excitement isn't for justice, but for the delicious smell of gambling. The person in charge even recognizes him and asks if he hadn't given up betting. Aaron insists that he'll just play one round and nothing more. With the confidence of someone who's been there thousands of times, Aaron sits in front of the girl, declaring that he hopes she won't disappoint him. The surprise is that, contrary to the rumors, she rolls the same numbers in the first rounds, which means it's a tie. So, he proposes raising the stakes. She accepts, thinking he's an idiot, since she lost on purpose just to give him that confidence. Right then, a man coughs behind her, a signal that it's time for her to start winning. Just like that, the girl activates her abilities, allowing her to change the dice at will. The problem is that suddenly Aaron asks her to stop, questioning if she's using magic. She gets nervous, claiming he has no proof, but he tells her the only proof he needs is the result, a roll of 1 and 4, exactly the number she needed to end the game. The twist is that he counters by revealing he also rolled a 1 and 4. Even though he's caught her cheating, he decides to bet even more money and even his own hand. Slowly, the tension begins to rise. He tells her that what she's doing is nothing special, that it's common among young mages who think they're too clever and end up getting involved in this kind of stupidity. What complicates matters is that the girl is not alone. The man who gave her the signal, along with several bandits around the tavern, start drawing their weapons, threatening that if he doesn't want to die, he'd better leave all the money and get out. Of course, Aaron stays calm, declaring that they don't know who they're messing with, but that he's willing to forgive them since the game has been fun. He then pulls out a gold coin and offers one more round. While this excites many, someone asks what the hell he's trying to do by betting even more money, knowing he'll lose. Aaron provokes them further, asking if they're scared, until they accept, matching his bet with the same amount, and also adding the girl's hand. Naturally, they warn him it'll all depend on her. She just follows orders, while the protagonist asks how she ended up involved with this trash. He assumes she must be very poor and trying to earn money for a magic academy. The girl denies it, claiming she doesn't know what he's talking about, and that she plans to strip him of everything. In their minds, the swindlers believe the protagonist is only stalling for time. But the surprise comes when Aaron asks the girl if she's able to chill beer with magic, leaving everyone confused until she answers yes, and he immediately shouts, "You're approved," before throwing the dice back at the swindlers. We then see that the game consists of both players shaking their dice in a cup, and the one with the highest number wins. But Aaron no longer plans to follow those rules. Instead, he begins giving them a brutal beating, and when the dice finally hit the table, his number is indeed higher. Still, none of that matters anymore. Even when one of the swindlers attacks with an axe, nearly cutting him in half, Aaron stops the weapon with a single hand and asks if he isn't ashamed of living at the expense of a little girl. At that moment, another tries to strike him with dark magic, but the protagonist dodges at the perfect instant, causing the spell to hit another swindler instead, killing him instantly. Between sarcasm and mocking remarks, the girl can only freeze in place, watching how Aaron defeats them all with his bare hands. Kale insists that every time he goes gambling, he ends up fighting, but at least some of these fools are wanted criminals. Even so, the protagonist couldn't care less, and he walks toward the girl, who starts apologizing and begging him not to kill her. He assures her that she doesn't need to worry. If she takes care of preparing a cold beer for him every day, he'll guarantee her work, lodging, and food until she finds a magic academy. The offer seems too good to be true, but with a smile, he extends his hand and asks if she wants to go with him. The girl accepts. What we see next is Aaron training peacefully when the little girl shows up to bring him a perfectly chilled beer. He shamelessly calls her his personal refrigerator, affirming that the temperature is just perfect. He's so pleased that he pats her head and asks how old she is. She answers that she's 12, which surprises him since she looks much younger and doesn't seem happy about it. Then Henna asks if she's his daughter. Aaron clarifies that she's just a mage he found on the street and that she can think of her as his new employee. That seems to relieve the woman, who hugs the girl, saying she's far too adorable to be his daughter and promises to protect and care for her with love and affection that almost feels genuine. Until the girl introduces herself as Kana, at which point Henna reveals her true intentions, asking how many beers she can chill in a single day. Aaron decides to leave them talking business. We then see his routine as captain of the guard, which goes something like this. First, he's greeted by Manhwa, who begs him to stop beating people up indiscriminately. Then, he goes out to patrol the market to keep order, which basically means taking whatever he wants under the excuse of procedure. The merchants have no choice but to accept it, since thanks to him, there are no thugs in the market. Finally, he gathers with the rest of his unit to extort smugglers, squeezing every last coin from them during inspections of who enters and who leaves. That's when Aaron notices there aren't many visitors that day, and everything seems normal, until a man approaches from behind and in a shady tone says, "The flowers of Carnelia never wither." The protagonist recognizes him and asks if Scar sent him again. The man keeps trying to act mysterious, warning that Aaron shouldn't mention that name lightly, since Scar is the shadow of the Cassandric fortress, and so on and so on. The point is, he's come with important information. Apparently, many outsiders have been entering recently, posing as merchants while acting suspiciously. He even hands Aaron a letter from Scar with more details, but it basically says the same thing in even fancier words. So Aaron tosses it aside and tells him to stop bothering him with childish games. The man leaves, while Aaron thinks that as shady as those new visitors are, they could actually be good for the economy of such a remote place. But all of that fades into the background when he sees someone else approaching. He tells Carter to wake up and get ready to make some money. They quickly stop the carriage and come across a highly suspicious merchant, so suspicious that even Aaron considers arresting him. But it turns out Carter knows him and greets him naturally, introducing him as Thor Noah. There we see why they're such good friends, because the man doesn't hesitate to pull out a bag full of silver coins, which instantly changes Aaron's opinion from shady bastard to curious to seems like a very pleasant fellow. Not only that, but Carter asks for a little of what he gave him last time, and the man hands over a small vial with capsules. Highly illegal. And although Aaron agrees to look the other way, he makes it clear that he still has to inspect everything that enters the fortress. With no other choice, the man accepts. The protagonist also notices that he has a strange tattoo on his neck. However, the real problem begins when they go to the back of the carriage and Carter nearly falls backward from the stench, because what the man is transporting is nothing less than the rotting corpses of goats. Naturally, Aaron asks him what he plans to do with that, and the man's expression makes his earlier suspicions resurface, only to vanish instantly when he hands Aaron another bag of money. By the end of the day, they welcome him to Kassadrik, and the man thanks them. Yet behind their backs, he's already thinking about how he will soon turn this place into hell. Fortunately, Aaron immediately remembers Scar's message about the supposed merchants who have been behaving suspiciously, so he knows he must keep an eye on him. Later, while drinking in the tavern, Bryn tells them that Charlotte invited him out, and the plan is to go watch the next execution together. Berna can't believe he actually has dates, but Aaron's doubts are a bit more logical, asking how on earth they can enjoy an execution as if it were a cultural festival. Bryn even says he plans to give her his mother's special bread, which horrifies the group because they've already tasted it and found it disgusting, so much so that they nearly vomit just from remembering it. Bryn doesn't understand what's wrong with it, and Aaron tries to explain that it's like taking excrement and baking it in an oven. That's when Scar's messenger reappears with the same dramatic flair as before, only to be met with a punch to the face that knocks him out cold on the floor. Aaron knows this is the signal that Scar wants to meet, so he heads out to find him. Scar starts giving him the usual speech about how together they will protect Kassadrik, but the protagonist cuts him off, saying he didn't come to listen to all that nonsense, and mocks him for the ridiculous hats that he and his people wear. He even insists it's time to drop his childish role-playing game of wanting to be a vigilante. But Scar warns him that the situation is serious. He's been following the outsiders and noticed that they gather every night, so he's sure they're plotting something. Even though Aaron keeps brushing him off, he finally tells him that he'll take care of everything, so Scar should stay out of it. To be honest, he only said that to get rid of him, but even so, Aaron begins to think that maybe it would be better to start acting more cautiously from now on. Afterward, he visits a small house in the forest where the executioner Dallas and his son Ted live. He brings them a sack of apples while thinking the place is as gloomy as ever. Dallas apologizes for always relying on him and tells him to make himself at home, asking if it's true that Aaron was the one responsible for capturing the criminals of the upcoming execution. It turns out they were members of a rather dangerous group. Aaron insists he was just doing his job and notes that Ted has grown quite a lot. He also hands Dallas some extra money from Nova, since Lord Kassadrik himself plans to attend the next execution and explicitly requested that it be a full spectacle. Dallas assures him there's nothing to worry about and even says he plans to bring Ted along so he can start getting familiar with the family trade. After all, in this world, children are destined to inherit their parents' professions. Still, Dallas admits he has his doubts, since executioners are shunned and excluded by society, condemned to a life of disgrace. In fact, that was the reason his wife left them. So he thanks Aaron, saying he's the only one who treats them normally. The protagonist insists that he does it because he wants to, since they're the only normal ones in this damned place. The other used to be Hans, but they both know how that ended. They lament how such a kind man became scum, and Aaron points out that no one is free from sin. He asks Dallas that, if he ever becomes a criminal, he should make sure to cut off his head cleanly. It's Ted who promises to give him the premium treatment. With that, they say their goodbyes. Meanwhile, we see Thor Noah meeting with the other outsiders, commenting that it's been difficult to carry out covert operations thanks to the ever-watchful Scar. However, one of them insists that outside the fortress things are also complicated, since the attack at Kootenai in Noctville ended up being a failure. But Dornoa insists that they must remain calm because they will take advantage of the execution to begin moving and to capture the heart of Lady Cassedric. After that, a few days pass until the moment of the event finally arrives. Kana uses the opportunity to earn some money by promoting perfectly chilled beer, while Henna does the same by selling bread with strawberry jam and red wine, all on the protagonist's recommendation, faithful and smooth for narration. When relatable situations are brought up, the interesting part comes when Henna asks Aaron why he took Jana in. Aaron only insists that he's using her as his personal refrigerator, but Henna knows there must be another reason. It's unusual for him to show interest in others. Finally, the protagonist admits that she reminded him of a stray kitten he once adopted. But the moment is interrupted by Burnham, who doesn't understand why they have to be there while the rest of the unit is resting. Aaron explains that he can think of it as a secret mission. They're there to make sure nothing strange happens. In fact, he asks about the others, since only he and Paul showed up. It turns out Bryn is on his date, and they assume Carter is sleeping like a log. After that, Aaron takes a look at the dungeons, where he finds Ted trying to calm down those he calls his guests, telling them not to be nervous and so on. But it's useless. After all, they are the condemned. His way of calming them is by saying, "Don't worry, my father will kill you without pain." At that, one of the condemned throws himself against the bars, trying to speak, but Aaron ignores him completely. With a clear smile, he declares that the time has come, and it's time for their heads to roll. Dallas then begins his work, delivering precise, clean strikes that decapitate them in a single blow, while the crowd erupts in euphoric cheers. In the middle of it all, Aaron is in charge of bringing the condemned forward. He reflects that in this medieval world, executions work like a sort of political festival, not only to ease the citizens' repressed violence, but also to display the ruler's authority and control. What makes this one even more important is that, according to Lego Tonova, the criminals he captured were responsible for murdering a noble of Karzan, a region with which Lord Cassedric plans to form an alliance. So more than an execution, it is a vital diplomatic event. That's why he was warned that nothing could go wrong. Aaron thinks that warning so much about something is bad luck. Everything proceeds as normal until he notices a hooded figure slipping out from under the podium where Lord Fulputz, the ruler of Cassedric, is seated. He sees that it is none other than Dornoa. The problem is that he has no time to react, because in an instant an explosion goes off on the other side of the city, followed by dozens more spread throughout the execution site. Aaron moves quickly, but the worst part is that one of the explosions hits Lord Fulputz, sending him flying through the air. And since that's his boss, if he dies, Aaron will be executed as well. Meanwhile, Dallas calmly decapitates the next criminal, stating that no matter what happens, he must fulfill his duty. This motivates the protagonist to set aside his fear and do what he must as captain of the guard. Of course, everything descends into complete chaos. While Burnham, Bryn, Polly, and Charlotte try to keep the people under control, panic has already taken hold. Aaron appears alongside them and takes the opportunity to ask if they've seen a hooded man pass by. They all respond that they haven't noticed anything strange. But in the distance, he finally sees Dornoa, who has already managed to seize Vivian in his arms. Unfortunately, that only means the young lady has once again become the target. Without panicking, he firmly orders his entire unit to move. They're going to hunt down a criminal. By this point, 4 members of the unit have arrived, and Aaron makes it clear, if they don't rescue her, they will all die. So they spend the whole afternoon searching until night falls, with the good news that Lord Fulputz survived, and the only one who died was some random knight. All that remains is to find the young lady. The surprise comes out of nowhere when they encounter Ben, who tries to greet the protagonist casually, though it's obvious he's badly injured. He emits a strange energy, as if trying to heal himself with his aura. Aaron wonders why he's so weak if he's a knight, though he doesn't hesitate to help him with a magic potion. Ben explains that he was careless, and the criminal turned out to be a very powerful dark mage. But more worrying, he whispers that there is a traitor among the guards, so they must be very careful. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoes from the other side of the city, a voice both he and Burnham recognize instantly. It was Kale, writhing in pain alongside the others, while the blue demon attacking them wonders why he's overreacting so much after barely receiving a single blow. Kale insists that he's only buying time. Clearly, The enemy doesn't understand what Kale means, but the answer comes when one of the surrounding walls is completely destroyed. Through it appears the protagonist, who grabs the demon by the neck with one hand while complaining about the poor quality of construction in this world. Overwhelmed by his strength, the demon wonders who the hell this monster is, while Aaron is equally perplexed, but at how weak the creature is. So much so that he decides to spare its life, warning it that he already knows what will happen if it tries anything foolish. Of course, he also demands information, and the demon immediately starts spilling everything, insisting that the dark mage is behind it all, wanting to steal the heart of the Lord's daughter at the request of a powerful demon with whom he made a pact. The demon's survival instinct is so strong that it reveals every last detail, even the useless ones, so they spare its life, and the others take it to prison. However, things take a truly dark turn when Aaron is left alone in the alley. While he tries to piece together what's happening, he's suddenly surprised by Carter, who remarks that it's a beautiful night. Aaron asks if he just woke up, pointing out that he can't spend his entire life sleeping. But Carter insists he can't help it. He doesn't even feel alive when he sleeps well. The problem is that he says all this while slowly approaching Aaron, and in an instant he draws a dagger and attacks, releasing a dark aura that spreads through his body until he vows to put Aaron into a sleep from which he'll never wake. In between, we glimpse Carter's past. He recounts how, when he was young, a harsh famine struck his village, forcing them to survive on tree roots, rats, and raw cockroaches. Everything changed one day when they found a plate of meat on the table and enjoyed a delicious dinner after so long. But while everyone else ate happily, he couldn't stop wondering where that meat had come from, because there was no sign of his younger brother, the only one who, due to illness, couldn't help with chores. In short, though no one dared say it aloud, they had eaten him. From then on, Carter confesses, he could never sleep well again, always wondering if he'd be next. Despite the rawness of the confession, Aaron insists he doesn't want to hear it and keeps striking with everything he has, only to be surprised that Carter can match his pace perfectly. The traitor insists it's because he finally slept well for the first time in years, but clearly it has more to do with the sweets Dornoa gave him, which seemed to contain demonic energy, drastically boosting his strength and agility. Of course, this also fuels his confidence as he starts provoking the protagonist. Aaron decides it's time to take the battle seriously, since Carter has always had great talent with the sword despite never being properly trained. The problem is that Aaron, smiling, dodges him, thinking that not even with all the power in the world could Carter close the clear gap in experience between them. Carter realizes this too, so he decides to release even more demonic energy in a super powerful punch. Unfortunately for him, Aaron dodges it with absurd ease and then drives his blade straight into Carter's chest, asking him to please forgive him. In an instant, Carter finds himself face to face with his younger brother and can't help but smile, closing his eyes and saying he feels a bit sleepy. Holding him in his arms, Aaron wishes that he can finally rest well. That would have been the end of it, if not for another explosion shaking the city. This time it's Dornoa fleeing from the rest of the guards. Worse still, he succeeds, slipping through a small tunnel that leads to a more open area where he gazes at Vivian's body, thinking it was all worth it, because at last he has obtained the one beloved by Manhwa. The man believes that all he has to do now to complete his plan is tear out her heart and eat it. But just as he's about to do it, Aaron appears behind him, asking how he knew about the tunnel and insisting that the time has come for an interview. His tone is deadly serious. Since Dornoa doesn't know what Aaron is capable of, he starts mocking him, summoning creatures made of pure demonic energy. He insists that Aaron is nothing more than a mere guard, which is why he doesn't even bother to kill him himself. Instead, he sends his familiars. Aaron wipes them out with a single swing of his sword, forcing Dornoa to summon more and more. Again, the protagonist cuts them down one after another. But the problem is that he ends up being bitten and infected with a magical curse that makes his body feel heavy and causes horrible pain with every movement. He knows he won't be able to endure for long. Even so, the simple fact that he can remain standing despite the poison is impressive, and Dornoa recognizes this, asking if he really thinks he can face his entire legion of shadows. Aaron insists he has no problem dealing with his farm animals, and though technically he should capture him alive, Dornoa took advantage of the suffering of one of his men to use him as a puppet, so he will not forgive him and sentences him to immediate execution. And so he begins to annihilate the shadows one by one, until Dornoa has no choice but to get serious, creating a kind of parasite that descends upon the protagonist's body. This is a triple curse that not even a knight could escape. Still, the protagonist only insists that he will tear it to pieces, and with just a few strikes, as if it were some common enemy, he destroys the parasite, telling Dornoa to stop joking around. Now desperate, Dornoa pulls out a strange potion with a severed finger inside. But instead of drinking it, he smashes it to the ground, which directly allows him to summon a demon. It turns out to be a creature very similar to a dragon, whose attacks are powerful enough to destroy entire buildings. The mage confidently claims that a guard could never defeat something like that. But Eren charges ahead anyway. Though his agility allows him to strike, the creature's resilience prevents him from leaving even the slightest scratch. Realizing normal methods won't work, he holds his breath and voluntarily dives into the demon's mouth, entering an inner dimension that feels like water. There he decides to awaken the demon inside him, who has been fairly quiet since the last time they met. He directly asks it to lend him some of its power. At first it seems like the demon will refuse, but then it agrees, reinforcing his sword with that strange aura, on one condition, that Eren stop calling it Basta, because even if it doesn't know what it means, it sounds awful every time he says it. Eren agrees without hesitation. That's when things get interesting, because the aura feels like lightning flowing throughout his entire body, an exquisite power with which he is able to tear the demon apart from within. Meanwhile, Dornoa watches the situation in shock, recognizing it as aura, but still unable to believe that a mere guard could wield the techniques of a knight. By the time the dragon demon falls lifeless, Eren advances toward him, slowly but confidently. The mage is so desperate that he even asks if Eren is some envoy of the imperial family or a secret agent who knew all of this would happen. But Eren simply beheads him in one clean strike, declaring that he is nothing more than a simple guard in a ridiculously insane world. Later, a profound silence fills the place. Eren is about to leave, grateful that everything is finally over, when a powerful energy starts pouring from the mage's lifeless mouth, gathering into a demonic circle around his severed head. The protagonist quickly realizes this is one of those post-death spells, extremely powerful and a favorite among demons. Knowing what's coming, he shields Vivian in his arms from the massive wave of energy that sweeps through everything. But of course, it's already too late, because at that very moment, a gigantic demon appears and begins advancing toward them. The creature is so monumental, radiating such an immense aura, that even Eren admits he cannot defeat it. While the beast steps forward, he focuses only on escaping to avoid being crushed to death. Still, he knows he has no choice but to keep fighting. He's about to draw his sword when powerful shouts calling out for the young lady stop him. In an instant, the demon is struck by a devastating force. It turns out to be Johanna, together with a female knight with green hair, both fighting with everything they have. This gives Eren the chance to retreat into the forest with Vivian. At that moment, the young lady begins to wake up, and he can only imagine all the scenarios where the situation could be misunderstood as a kidnapping. So, he knocks her out with a direct blow to the head, leaving her unconscious, so someone else will have to deal with the explanations. Of course, he might have gone a little overboard, so he covers her head with a cloth to hide the massive bruise. Meanwhile, the warrior women deliver the final blow to the monster. Eren decides his shift is officially over and walks away. The problem is that apparently they never realized he was there. The green-haired woman even begins to cry, thinking they had arrived too late, until Johanna surveys the area and notices Vivian's body lying very close to them. But then comes the second misunderstanding. Seeing the cloth covering her face, they assume she is dead. From there, we get a small time skip, a week after the Dark Mage's attack. While drinking cold beers with the rest of his unit at the tavern, Eren confirms that their lord survived purely by miracle, and in the end, they concluded that Vivian and Carter were still alive. Not only that, but he was able to cover up the situation, claiming that Carter had actually died heroically in battle against the demon. This allowed Carter's family to receive compensation and ensured his name remained clean. The others lament that he had been so stupid as to face a demon on his own, but they mainly acknowledge his bravery, and the protagonist decides to raise a toast in his name, honoring him as a guard. Still, that honor won't last long, since word has already come from central offices that they will be sending a replacement that very day. The surprise comes when the new recruit enters to meet them. It turns out to be the Weasel, whose real name is Dylan. He greets everyone with an overly positive attitude, So much so that they actually start to miss Carter. While the boy insists he's glad to keep working with Aaron, the protagonist recognizes that, despite being noisy, he doesn't seem like a bad person. Not everyone agrees, though. Henna serves him a glass of beer, but stares at him threateningly, daring him to disrespect her again. Dylan takes the opportunity to apologize for what happened before. He knows it's no excuse, but insists that among mercenaries it's tradition to act like bullies. She tells him not to worry and points a crossbow at his head, saying it's normal for her to run into scum like him, and if he ever dares again, she'll split his skull open. The protagonist admits that's exactly what he expected of her. With that settled, he welcomes Dylan as the newest member of the 4th Squadron, handing him a sword and telling him he'd better do his best. The general reception is positive, and Dylan thanks them, overjoyed. Still, years later, he will remember that moment as the time he should have run away, before things spiraled out of control. Later, we see the protagonist hitting a merchant at the fortress gates, making it look like he's trying to wake him up, when in fact, it's part of his new security strategy. According to him, it reinforces safety. Dylan doesn't understand what that has to do with extorting visitors, or how hitting someone on the head could possibly verify if they're a demon or not. But he loves the idea and declares he'll give his all as a guard because of it. Aaron thinks the redhead might actually have a future in the business. But the situation shifts when Dylan starts extorting the next carriage, not realizing it bears the seal of the Fenner family. Aaron immediately pulls him aside, explaining to the driver that the boy doesn't know what he's doing. But when they see the carriage carries no noble, only soldiers, his attitude completely changes. He insists that the new rules were imposed by their lord, and disobeying them would be dishonoring his word. Not only that, Dylan backs him up, pointing out that the executioner is ready to cut some necks. The driver has no choice but to pay the fee and move on, nearly collapsing after receiving a blow to the head. That same day, Aaron is summoned to another meeting at the church. Worried about how this might affect the demon inside him, he shows up and is received by Johanna, who is as imposing as ever. Beside her stands Priest Billion, who insists that she knows everything. The protagonist nearly soils himself, thinking they've discovered his secret, until Billion congratulates him for having fought the demon personally. It turns out that, although he thought he had gone unnoticed, Johanna had seen him protect the young lady from the giant, so they have prepared a small reward for him. Naturally, Aaron's attitude changes the moment he remembers what happened last time, and excitedly he enters the church, only to be shocked when he learns the reward is being named an honorary counselor. In his mind, he curses them for not giving him more money. But the truly interesting part comes when the priest insists that Johanna wants to take a tour of the fortress and assigns him to show her around. The protagonist doesn't even get the chance to refuse, so he swears he'll make her pay for dragging him into such a useless task. Still, he knows he must be careful, since the woman wouldn't hesitate to smash his head in if she ever found out he was possessed by a demon. With that in mind, he decides to scare her off by taking her to a restaurant he supposedly frequents, when in reality, he brings her to Bryn's mother's place to eat her specialty, fish bread. The moment she tastes it, her expression is pure disgust, and the protagonist celebrates a small victory. But then she looks at him intently and asks if he isn't going to eat. Since he has to keep up appearances, Aaron digs in as well, practically starting a competition where both of them keep eating and pretending to enjoy it, all while struggling against the urge to vomit. The protagonist admits she must be incredibly strong to endure such a taste. However, when Bryn's mother kindly offers them seconds, Johanna runs straight out of the place. In his mind, Aaron thinks it was a brilliant move, until the woman sets the second round in front of him, and he wonders if it wouldn't have been better if Johanna had just crushed his skull instead. A few days later, Kyle is surprised to see Aaron's armor has become even more ridiculous than before. But Aaron insists that being an honorary counselor has its perks. Merchants won't stop offering him discounts. Still, that's not the important part. Kyle explains that the Fenner family has sent soldiers to work directly with them, and knowing Aaron, he warns him not to start a fight. Unfortunately, it seems too late, because the same coachman from before enters and immediately recognizes the protagonist. Boiling with anger, he storms forward, ready to put him in his place. Rightly so, he accuses Aaron of extorting and beating him like an idiot. But Aaron shamelessly ignores him, to the point where Kyle has to remind him that, as an honorary counselor, he shouldn't cause a scene. The problem is, The coachman mistakes Aaron's silence for fear and provokes him, saying he should know his place as a mere guard. That's enough for the protagonist to knock him out instantly with a single punch, clarifying to his men that technically this isn't a fight, it's a one-sided attack. He also trusts that nothing can be done against him because he's an honorary counselor. The most surprising part is that when the coachman wakes up, instead of holding a grudge, he feels only deep respect, insisting that someone as strong as Aaron has the potential to work with any noble. That's exactly what he tells Kyle, while watching the protagonist headbutt yet another wave of visitors at the gates, proudly introducing himself as Galheim of the Fenner family. Kyle insists that, according to their captain, this is his foolproof method of identifying demons. And while everyone is sure it's just a way for him to relieve stress, the surprise comes when, thanks to one of his strikes, a demon attempting to infiltrate reveals its true form. Aaron himself is the most surprised, since he had truly been hitting people without reason. The demon turns out to be so weak that they capture it instantly. The problem is, since it had only been a week since the last attack, the poor creature ends up in the hands of the three strongest people in the fortress, Johanna, William, and the green-haired warrior, who annihilate it so brutally that even the protagonist feels sorry for it. When he returns to the inn, he finds Dylan working there, and Henna explains that he had been apologizing over and over. So she told him to prove how sorry he was by working for her for free. The truth is, she needed the help, since the place has been packed thanks to Kana's beer. To Aaron, it makes sense. Beer always tastes better cold. Still, he thinks it's a waste to have such a talented girl working as nothing more than a refrigerator. And even though magic books are expensive, he knows it's time to help her improve. Meanwhile, we see an old man and a boy driving a carriage, trying to stay calm until the men inside threaten them not to try anything funny before they get into the fortress. Jacob, one of them, complains about having to come to such a remote place just to find one person, but the darker-skinned man reminds him that the boss's orders are absolute. Meanwhile, the boy, Furis, watches anxiously, since although they're obeying out of fear, they could get into trouble during inspection. The old man reassures him not to worry, since they're headed to the Cedric fortress, and all they'll need to do is bribe the guards. Once inside, they'll be safe, and just as he predicted, when they arrive, they are received by the fourth unit, and since the protagonist isn't there, Paul simply takes the bribe coin as usual. But the drama begins when Dylan insists that they should raise the fee so they can share with the new soldiers from the Fenner family. Of course, Paul disagrees and says that what they have is enough. This makes the coachman incredibly nervous. Fearing for his life, he insists on giving them everything they want. But that's not the end of the procedure. Thanks to the success of the protagonist's methods, now everyone in the carriage must get down for an individual inspection, and anyone who looks even slightly suspicious gets whacked in the head. And that's exactly what happens. Seeing the passengers acting a bit strangely, Dylan hits one of them, knocking him unconscious. Jacob reacts immediately, trying to fight back, but is killed on the spot. With his last breath, he hopes his companion will be able to finish the mission. While all of this unfolds, Aaron only thinks that the paperwork will be a complete disaster. But he couldn't care less, because he has a new objective: improving his refrigerator. That's why, when he returns to the tavern and sees the little girl, he tries his best to smile kindly, though he fails miserably, and asks her to tell him what kind of magic she can use. Kana explains that she can move dice, chill things, and do a bit of clairvoyance. All of these abilities make Aaron think her teacher must have been some kind of gambling addict. Either way, the point is that she learned everything from some random loser. Aaron wonders if she'll be able to learn real magic if he gets her some books. Kana, thinking he's about to abandon her, desperately insists that she'll learn quickly and help him with anything he needs. But the protagonist recalls Avery, the mage from his old group, who once told him the reason she learned magic was pure desperation, and that she managed it thanks to her impressive talent. So when he hears Kana begging him not to get rid of her, he clarifies that she's misunderstanding. He asks her instead if she wants to learn new tricks. Immediately, with an attitude she must have picked up from Dylan, Kana insists she'll do whatever it takes. She's about to mention something important she needs to tell him, but they're interrupted by Dylan, who bursts in to report that the criminals they caught that morning have escaped. Not only that, but one of them destroyed the wooden bars with his teeth and fought the guards barehanded. It's the same man Dylan knocked out earlier, which makes him panic, fearing the man will come after him. Aaron couldn't care less, but he still has to do his job. He decides to take care of everything, telling the girls to stay alert. All the guards gather at headquarters, where Manuel immediately scolds them for being so incompetent. But the protagonist realizes that these criminals must be up to something important if they refuse to accept imprisonment. One of the guards mentions that he looked into the man and discovered he's a repairman from Karzan with a very bad reputation. Aaron is surprised Dylan managed to capture him at all. Their meeting is interrupted when Forrest rushes in, desperately explaining that his master did nothing wrong and that they only brought those men in the carriage because they were threatened. We learn that the old man was also imprisoned, but took the opportunity to escape. Even though Aaron knows him and has done business with him several times, he insists he can't let him escape, not even if he's innocent. Meanwhile, the old man Levi runs frantically through the streets, wondering how he ended up in this situation. The criminals with him complain about being caught when technically they hadn't done anything suspicious yet. Then they hear the whistles of the guards, so they decide to run in the opposite direction, only to fall into a trap. On the other side of the street, the protagonist is waiting. Seeing that it's 1 against 5 or 7, they plan to overwhelm him with numbers. But Aaron defeats them one by one. Levi thinks to himself that of all the things that could go wrong, he had to run into the most heartless guard in Cedric. Knowing what the protagonist is capable of, Levi falls to the ground, begging not to be killed. Aaron simply grabs him by the neck and asks why the hell he had to escape when all he did was worry his beloved disciple. At that moment, the boy arrives at the scene, and Levi realizes he was wrong to judge the protagonist by his appearance. However, Aaron knows there's still work to be done, since right there he's informed that the repairman escaped toward District 5, exactly where Henna's Inn is located. Sure enough, we see him arrive, but he's stopped by Dylan and none other than Scar, who in an imposing manner declares that he won't tolerate a criminal entering his territory without his authorization. The Shadow of Castor prepares to annihilate him, but the repairman is faster, knocking him aside with a single move before glaring at them and warning that he's looking for a girl with violet hair. That marks the beginning of a fierce battle between both sides. Scar tries to counterattack, and though he's thrown to the ground again, he manages to create an opening for Paul, who surprises the repairman with a powerful strike. Sadly, not even a second passes before the repairman stabs him straight in the chest. Realizing he has no chance, Paul begs Dylan to run. Terrified, the boy obeys, but little by little, he remembers how kindly the blonde had treated him, like a true brother, even though Dylan was nothing more than a mercenary. He knows he can't abandon him. Gathering every ounce of courage he has left, he provokes the repairman, shouting that he isn't afraid, since he already kicked his ass once before. As expected, this enrages the man, who charges at him in an instant and utterly destroys him. Dylan can only wonder where the hell the stupid protagonist is and why he hasn't shown up yet. The repairman approaches, ready to finish Dylan off. But the final blow never comes, because at that very moment, the protagonist appears and sends him flying with a single punch. Dylan bursts into tears of joy, only for Aaron to ask him if he seriously had the audacity to call him stupid. Recognizing that his hearing is extraordinary, Dylan decides it's best to play dead. The repairman stands back up, muttering that everyone in this damn city seems to have a death wish. But Aaron simply asks if he's the idiot who went down with a single smack to the head, mocking him further before unleashing his full strength. The man trembles, straining to hold back Aaron's blade. The protagonist doesn't waste time. He kicks him hard in the side, then follows up with about 10 more blows. Eventually acknowledging his toughness, he demands to know what business brought him here. Finally, the repairman admits he's looking for someone, a little girl with violet hair. Aaron starts piecing it together, remembering that the people who had been using her before he rescued her also came from the Karzan region. He's surprised they would send someone just to recover a mere brat. But judging by the repairman's eyes, he realizes the man knows exactly who he's talking about and warns that he won't stop until he tells him everything. Just when it seems like the repairman is about to unleash a powerful energy similar to aura, Dylan stabs him in the back. The man vows to kill him, but before he can do anything, he collapses to the ground, bleeding out. Aaron simply watches the scene, thinking to himself that he needs a beer. The next day, Dylan visits Paul and Scar to brag about his heroic feats. That's when Aaron shows up to wish them well and torture them with fish bread from Bryn's mother. The idiot even has the audacity to demand they eat every last piece. Scar feels relieved he can't eat anything, while Paul, trying to be polite, accepts, adding that Aaron should also have some. Afterward, we return to the inn, where Furist tries to talk to Kana, but she completely ignores him, running to the door with a cold beer the moment she sees Aaron arrive. He thanks her and asks if she has any plans for the future, like becoming a knight or a lady of a noble house. The girl only insists that she wants to live, and he assures her he'll do his best to protect her, as long as she keeps giving her all from now on. Later, we see the protagonist negotiating with a monk, trying to sell potions at an absurdly high price. Luckily, one of his companions shows up and mentions that the protagonist is an honorary counselor, which earns him nearly a 50% discount. As they leave, Aaron thanks Anis's brother for helping him, but instead, the man apologizes for his companion's attitude. He explains that the bot, one of the high authorities of the church, will be arriving soon, and everyone is stressed with preparations. As they part ways, the protagonist can only think that maybe there really are some good people in the church, not all freaks like the priest and the inquisitor. Speaking of the devil, he then runs into Johanna, who is eating a massive cake. The interesting part is that when she notices him, she walks over without a word and offers him a piece with a warm smile. And though the protagonist enjoys it, the dessert leaves no doubt that she is not a normal person. Afterward, Aaron has a meeting with Manuel, who insists that next month they won't have any rest at all. While everyone complains, Aaron knows the commander is only following orders, since soon they'll also be visited by the eldest son of the Fenner family. In short, busy days are coming, and the worst part is that Manuel then tells him Nova has summoned him. But instead of scolding, the woman greets him with a bright and gentle smile, explaining to him the proper use of a door. Of course, Aaron understands exactly what she means, since he already knows how they work. She asks him why the hell he never uses them properly and always ends up breaking everything. We see that although his accomplishments have been remarkable, he's broken around 20 walls throughout the city, and all the repair costs have been deducted from his pay, leaving him with just a single silver coin from the last mission. Curiously, he simply looks at the coin and hands it to her, saying it's her tip and that she should go get a beer instead of wasting so much time alone. Naturally, she begins insulting him, but he simply walks out, insisting that he definitely knows how to use a door. After that, he goes on patrol with Kyle, which basically means carrying out pointless inspections to make money and have fun. Definitely one of his favorite activities, if not for the constant trouble stirred up by the locals. There, they come across a couple of men fighting, and as expected, instead of breaking it up, the protagonist encourages them. But things get more interesting when another argument breaks out. A brown-haired woman accusatorily asks a group of people, "Who did it?" Aaron and Kyle step closer, and she explains that one of those three bastards stole her silverware. Kyle thinks they shouldn't get involved, but the protagonist decides to stir the pot, insisting that one of them must be guilty, as if it were some kind of detective game. He asks the woman when the crime took place. She explains the silverware was at her house last night during dinner, but by this morning it was gone. Since her three neighbors are the only ones nearby, surely one of them is responsible, so they interrogate the suspects. The first, a man with goblin-like features, insists he went straight from his house to work. The second, a buck-toothed woman, refuses to talk about personal matters but points out she owns a large silver mirror, so she has no need to steal silverware. The third, a pale, unfriendly-looking man, claims he didn't even leave his house yesterday and is only here because the woman dragged him out. With nothing clear, the protagonist decides they need to investigate further, so they'll inspect each of their homes. The problem, what they didn't know at the time, was that this ridiculous incident he got involved in out of boredom would end in tragedy. At first, Kyle disagrees, but he quickly joins Aaron in his madness. They drag the three neighbors to their homes, suspecting from their reactions that all of them are hiding something. To the protagonist, this is nothing more than entertainment. The first house they check is the buck-toothed woman's. Sure enough, she has an impressive silver mirror, totally out of place in such a simple house. Aaron confirms the silverware isn't there. But the surprise comes when they find men's underwear, which should be impossible since she's single. In short, she's having an affair, which is considered a crime. She tries to distract them by offering cake, and for that alone, the protagonist decides to pretend he didn't see anything. Next, they check the pale man's house. It's filled with dozens of romance novels, so they mock him, calling him a bookworm. But then the protagonist finds a bracelet hidden among the books and decides to steal it, assuming the man won't care. The strange part is that suddenly, the demon inside him starts making odd noises, and Aaron has to pretend his joints are cracking, cursing under his breath that such a slip-up could expose them. Kyle notices the bracelet in his hand, and the pale man says he can take it if he wants. That's enough for the protagonist to declare him innocent. Finally, they head to the goblin-looking man's home. Aaron, happy to have taken a prize from each place, presses the point that since the other two are innocent, this one must be guilty. The tension rises, and the protagonist insists he will search every corner of the man's house. But rather than a home, the man lives in a stable, where they find a mare dressed as a princess named Char, whom he treats as his wife. Of course, Aaron doesn't need to see any more. He simply kicks him and walks out, leaving the question of who the real thief was still unanswered. Just then, the woman reappears, insisting that it was all a mistake, that she already found her missing silverware, and she apologizes for the trouble. The boys head back to the tavern, grumbling, but there Kana greets Aaron with his beer, smiling with satisfaction. That makes him suspicious, wondering what she's plotting. But his surprise grows when he looks into the beer and notices that the ice inside is shaped like a flower. Kana proudly declares that she worked very hard on it. Aaron can't help but think it's kind of pointless to put such a beautifully crafted piece of ice in a beer, but her happy face is enough for him to praise her and decide to get her magic books as soon as possible. At that moment, Kana notices the bracelet on his wrist and is so drawn to it that she tries to take it. Aaron decides to hand it over as a gift, without understanding why she's so excited over such a trinket. He figures the pale guy turned out to be more useful than he expected. Meanwhile, that same pale man is cleaning up the mess the protagonist caused, thinking that everyone around him is ignorant and barbaric. He still can't believe that a mere brute dared to walk off with a jewel from the White Magic Tower. The more he thinks about it, the angrier he gets, though he admits he was lucky to have cast a camouflage spell so that the magic books looked like simple romance novels. The worst part, of course, was losing the bracelet. He actually realized everything the moment the protagonist touched it and decided to attack then. But that boy wasn't affected at all, as if he had some kind of shield. That shouldn't be possible, considering he isn't a knight who can wield aura. It becomes clear that Aaron had been protected by the demon inside him. Even so, despite losing the bracelet, the pale man doesn't see the situation as catastrophic, since his true mission has always been to investigate the one loved by Manhwa, Lady Vivian. After that, we return to the protagonist and Bryn, who notice that the soldiers of the Fenner family seem to be avoiding them, so much so that they don't even give them time to conduct inspections. The interesting part comes when another carriage arrives, this time carrying a very friendly young man named Chon, who works as the administrator of Karzan. He's come to deliver the reward for capturing those criminals. Overall, the interaction goes smoothly, and the young man continues on his way. But Bryn admits he feels uneasy about so many high-ranking people coming into the city. The visits don't end there, though. Another carriage arrives, carrying a gray-haired man who recognizes the protagonist from what he's heard about him. He gives him the blessing of the sun god. Aaron realizes this is the famous Jabut and does the church's hand sign. The man corrects him, showing him how to do it properly, and says he hopes to see him again. Soon after, Nova arrives with Chon to meet the protagonist. The woman tells him to bring it out. The boy doesn't understand what she means until she reveals a sack in front of him, filled with the heads of the criminals he defeated. Chon immediately starts vomiting, while Nova happily states that now she can finally give him the reward for his achievements. The heads are loaded onto her carriage, and she thanks him for capturing those criminals, since they had been a real headache for Karzan. They belong to a dangerous organization known as the Lone Wolf. That makes the protagonist remember they had been after Kana, and he wonders if more people will come looking for her. Then Shona asks him to recommend the best restaurant in Kastrik. At first, Aaron's instinct is to send him to Bryn's mother, but for the first time, he doesn't. Instead, he takes him to a decent place with the plan of learning more about that organization. There, they are served a true delicacy, and Chon agrees to share what he knows. He explains that the Lone Wolf is one of the 3 great organizations of Karzan, along with the Frozen Dagger and the Cute Bunny. Lately, though, the Lone Wolf has been causing far more trouble than usual, as if something strange had happened. Worst of all, they're led by a man named Philip, who was supposedly born into a noble family, but was exiled after attempting to poison his own father. The most terrifying thing about this man is how territorial he is. One time, members of the Frozen Dagger went to one of his estates and took a sword from a shelf, a small act that could easily have gone unnoticed. But Philip hunted them down relentlessly until he reclaimed the sword. Knowing this, the protagonist realizes he is a bloodthirsty man and wonders if perhaps he sees Cana as his property. Still, Aaron doesn't worry too much, since no matter how dangerous a wolf may be, it can always lose its fangs if it bites what it shouldn't. He decides the best course of action is to take a little business trip. The next day, he presents himself before Nova, who is preparing to travel to Karzun, and asks her to give him a ride since he has matters to attend to there. Although her men have their doubts, Nova insists there's no problem. She reflects that thanks to him, they've resolved a great number of problems at the fortress. In fact, she recalls a moment when, after several important accomplishments, she assured him he could be promoted. But the protagonist told her he preferred to keep working as captain of the guard. In that moment, she realized he is not someone she can fully understand. Still, she knows better than to overthink it. What matters is keeping him stationed at Kassadrik Fortress and making use of his abilities as much as possible.